then we get on to tribunal claims. So discrimination is the most common claim made, other than unfair dismissal. It's often appended to other claims. You'll often see the two of those hand in hand. But unlike unfair dismissal, it doesn't require 2 years service. Again, one that we hear fairly often is, well, this person's under 2 years, we can dismiss them, we can do what we like. Well, no, because, as I said earlier, everyone has protected characteristics. Have any of these been engaged? Have any of these been raised? Is there any way that, as far as you know, that they could be? Because, unlike unfair dismissal, discrimination comes to much, much higher awards. The unfair dismissal reward in itself is, I hate to say low, but it's the same as redundancy pay. It's 1 week for every year of service after 2 years, 1.5 if you're over 40, etc. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot. Now, discrimination claims get you an injury to feelings award, which is decided via the Vento bands, based on case Vento that set these out initially. The lower band, which is the most common one, is 1,200 to 12,100. It's a pretty broad band, I'm sure you realise. Middle band, 12,100 to 36,400. And the upper band is 36,400 to 65,700. And as I said, the award is uncapped, so you have extreme cases over 60,700, and we've seen cases recently that have gone to 1 million. It's very rare, but it does happen, and it's something that I would suggest being very aware of, because the more discriminatory you are, the more that's going to creep up, and that comes to a very, very high sum indeed. It does happen. So what will the process involve at the tribunal, and how do you prove that you didn't discriminate? This is very much a case-by-case basis thing. But normally when a claim comes in citing discrimination, stating that, you will often find, especially if it's someone representing themselves, that they don't really elaborate, not in the level of detail that the tribunal would require. Chances are there will be preliminary hearings at which they really have to set out how this happened. Tribunal would guide them through basically presenting a prima facie case to see whether that can be presented. This is the point where we can say if it's a particularly weak claim, a particularly spurious claim, because it does happen, that they're being put to strike proof. We can challenge it. We can even ask for it to be, for a deposit order to be made. Obviously, it's free to make a tribunal claim, but this is the point where we can say, no, there's absolutely nothing to this. We want them to be asked to put a deposit down to essentially put their money where their mouth is. And if it turns out there's nothing to this, we're going to come after them for some of their legal costs. And I will say now, tribunals are very, very reluctant to award that. But it's something we can try, and it's not about scaring people off, but yeah, it can make people think, do I really have a claim here? Could this cost me more than my time? At least makes them apply themselves a bit more, because as this webinar will have shown you so far, you've been expected to apply yourself all the way up until now. It's their turn. How you prove you don't discriminate, I appreciate that can be a difficult one to think through, because you're being asked to prove that you didn't think in a certain way. And that's where, as we'll go on to the next slide, it's important to have the right policies in place, to have right training in place to show this is something that we take seriously. This is something that we actively avoid doing. Here's the process we follow. Here's what we do. ideally we would be in a position to say there is no scope here to say that we are discriminating. If you can get that far, I'll be very impressed. So what leads to employers losing these claims at tribunal? I would say that the biggest one is not having clear procedure or not following a clear procedure. And we see example after example of this in case law. My colleague Joe, it wasn't a discrimination case, but he did just give us a blog post, I believe, on a recent claim, at least unfair dismissal claim, I think, where the claim was lost but it was because the employer did not follow correct procedure. It was a gross misconduct dismissal. They didn't have the right investigations. They didn't hold that to a high standard. They didn't follow their own process. This isn't a finding on any great merit of the employee's actions. This isn't even really saying that the employee did the right thing. It's just saying the employer you didn't have a clear process. And that's where the tribunal will always say, if we have to err on one side or another, we're going to side with the little guy. We're going to side with the employee. So, but if you jump through the right hoops, if you cross the T's and dot the I's, and you can show that you mean it, you're in a very strong position 9 times out of 10. So, before we move on to Q&A, I'll quickly cover, sort of best practice approach here, between making sure that